You know how I always thought should play Cole McGrath in a live-action adaptation of the infamous franchise? Jason Statham, because not only does he look exactly like Cole, but he did play a character in 2 movies where he needed to charge himself up with electricity in order to keep himself alive. Plus he'll kick your ass. Hey everyone, Davey here. So I managed to play Infamous 2 recently because not only did it come with a piece of DLC that was very Halloween themed, and so I decided to play the original and then tackle that Halloween themed DLC to get myself into the spirit during the month of Halloween. So not only am I going to talk about the original game, but I'm also going to talk about that DLC at the end of this review. So Infamous 2 takes place a little while after Infamous 1, where everybody blames Cole McGrath, our main character, for what happened in Empire City, without getting into too much detail, because therefore I will then spoil the things that happened in Infamous 1. But let's just say that through a series of events, he leaves that city to find himself in a new one called New Marais. And it is here where he has to train his skills and improve his strength and harness his powers, or at least the highest capacity of his powers, so that he can then face the Beast, which is this prophesized monster that is threatening to unleash havoc upon the world. Now, the thing you need to keep in mind as a developer for a video game sequel is that you want to make it better than the original. And sometimes your instinct tells you to go bigger, go much more grand, and therefore you will have a much more improved sequel. And sometimes for video games, not necessarily movies, Michael Bay, but for video games, that could sometimes work in its favor. The story can be crap, but as long as you deliver some really exciting moments through the gameplay, you can therefore make a satisfying sequel. But in Infamous 2, not only did they make certain things bigger, but they improved on certain things that mostly reside in not only the story and the characters, but also the setting. Their decision to move the location of the story from Empire City, which personally I found kind of boring, because after a while you start to see the same shades of gray and black and white, because it's a city. It's supposed to be modeled after New York. So you start to see the same similar building with browns and blacks over and over again. And that's one of the slight complaints I had with Infamous 1. So now in Infamous 2, they moved the city to this place called New Marais, which is obviously supposed to resemble New Orleans. And it's designed just like the city in Louisiana, the capital of Louisiana. At least I think it's the capital. Is it the capital? I don't know. Might be kind of stupid. But they did such a good job of modeling this city after New Orleans, because it looks gorgeous. There's so many lights throughout the city. It's very vibrant in color, because most of these lights are in color. It's not just your basic beige lighting like the one I'm using here. You got some blue lights and red lights and neon signs with movie theaters around every corner, and some of these theaters are kind of inappropriate for certain kids because it is supposed to be modeled after New Orleans. And so not only are the buildings and the environment very much alive, but you also got some of the civilians walking down the streets with some programmed AI that feels responsive, which is supposed to happen considering the karma system in this game. They're supposed to react to you in a certain way, whether it be in a negative or positive way. But it has its own form of life to where these characters react in their own certain way. They're going to react differently than they did in Empire City. Just like in the real world, you're going to have different groups of people based on where you go in the nation. So obviously, being that this is modeled after New Orleans, you got some people down there that are very, very southern based, and they react to you in a way that it feels real. You even got some people walking down the street saying, "Screw the AA." I'll admit that the story was a little slow and kind of basic at the beginning, but once it gets going, there's some new interesting things that get brought up to the spotlight. Things that either make the story fresh and interesting, or certain things that are brought up from the previous game that tie everything together. And they did a really good job in the writing, making me care about the stuff that was going on in the story, considering that there were certain twists happening later on in the game that generally caught me by surprise. And the other interesting thing is that they also managed to improve on some of the characters. Cole McGrath is now a much more likable character than he was in the first one. That's not to say that he was a complete douchebag in the first game, but here there's some likability to him where you can really attach yourself to him and to the things that he does. Granted, you're controlling him, and because of the karma system, you can do things as Cole to your liking, whether they be good and bad, but they still manage to keep the character of Cole intact, no matter what kind of decisions you make. He's still that isolated character that is kind of gruff and gritty, but still he will react to the way to the decisions that you make, whether they be good or evil choices. And you also got some of the supporting characters that are actually rather good this time around. Zeke, who, you know, he'll test your tolerance in the first game, but here I found him to not only be genuinely funny at certain points, he had some funny lines of dialogue, but he was also likable and, more importantly, redeemable after certain events that happened in the first game. And then you got this other character named Quo, who was kind of generic at the beginning of the game, but much like the story, as it went on and they threw in this little twist with her character that made me feel sympathetic for the character. I felt sorry for her, and I attached myself more to her than I even did with Cole. It's not to say that I didn't care about Cole, but Cole was such a surprise character for me that I almost could not forget about her even after I had played the game. And even the villain, or I should say villains, were pretty good this time around. The main one that you're chasing after, he was kind of corny and campy in certain points, but he was the right amount of campiness and hamminess that a story such as this that deals with superhuman powers needed to be. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that every character was a knockout. There were a couple of characters that I just genuinely did not like. There's this character named LaRoche who was kind of stubborn and thick-headed, and there were certain moments where he was kind of creepy, and I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And there was this other character named Nyx who is supposed to be the demon on your shoulder, just like Quo is the angel on your shoulder, telling you what is good and bad and who you should side with the most of the time. But for the most part, I ended up siding with Quo because Nyx to me was just way too stubborn and kind of unlikable, because there were just certain moments where either she was annoying or I just simply flat out did not agree with her mindset, the way she perceived things. There were certain moments where I understood where she was coming from, considering her background, but still I didn't find it in me to really resonate with this character, so I honestly could have done without her. And if they needed to have a character in this game such as Nyx, I wish they could have changed certain things to her character that at least would have made me feel an internal struggle as to who to side with, because for the most part, I found who I needed to side with, considering that this other person was kind of annoying. Now, I already stated how much I like their decision to move the story to a city like New Marais and how beautiful it was. But the rest of the graphics for the game are really good and I dare say improved over the first one. They're a little bit smoother. The city is still an open world sandbox that you get to explore with responsive AI, but also you got the animated cutscenes from the first game carried on over here, and they still look as great as ever, mimicking a panel of a comic book, which is appropriate considering that this deals with superhuman powers. But what's also kind of cool is that now the cutscenes that are in-game, that are not supposed to be animated and to look like a comic book, they felt more cinematic than the ones in the first game, because I think, if I remember correctly, in the first game, there would be in-game cinematics, but they would be so stiff and in place that, I don't know, they just didn't have any sort of life to them. Whereas here, the camera would actually move around like it was a little mini movie, thus making it feel much more cinematic and lifelike, as opposed to the first game where the camera would just cut back and forth and there was nothing interesting about it. Now, the gameplay mostly consists of mechanics that are returning from the first game, but they come with a few changes that I dare say practically improved the gameplay from the first game. One of the returning mechanics is the one that I've mentioned already a couple of times, and that's the karma system. You still got the karma system that relies on what kind of decisions you make, whether it be the big hefty decisions that the game pauses to give you a chance to decide between two different decisions, one good or one evil, or certain acts that can be considered either good or evil, such as helping out police officers that is a good act, or an evil act such as knocking out street performers because you just simply find them annoying. These things boost your karma meter towards either a good level or a bad level. And after a certain segment of the good level or bad level that gets filled up, you gain certain upgrades and certain powers, or at least unlock the ability to purchase certain powers with your experience points that are either good powers or bad powers. For the majority of the time, they're kind of the same power. I mean, they inflict a similar amount of damage. they just look different because one is white and one is red, thus resembling which one's good and which one's evil. But don't get me wrong, there's still certain moments, mainly in these big decisions you have to make through the story, that still have some weight to them. They still make you think as to what you want to do. Especially that last one. I spent a good 5 minutes trying to think of what it is that I should do, because it kind of offered a little bit of a twist that I wasn't expecting, and therefore I was like, oh, who do I choose? Who do I choose? And some of these powers that you unlock as you progress in your karma meter are different than they were in the previous game, and they are still awesome. Not only because some of these powers are just simply cool to pull off, but also because this game, considering that it's a sequel, it introduces a new set of elements, and those elements are fire and ice. Some of these powers adapt to the elements of fire and ice, so you can use them in a variety of ways to tackle certain enemies. And the reason why this game throws you different elements to use with your powers, along with this melee weapon called an amp, which is provided for you by, at the beginning of the game, so that you can take on enemies at a close range and just knock them out with a melee combo that you can then finish off with a finisher by filling up the certain meter and pressing the triangle button. And trust me, some of these finishers are really, really cool. The reason why this game gives you all this stuff is because they actually throw in a new group of enemies that are these creatures that come out of nowhere, that I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil the fun of it. But they throw in these creatures as well as these different forms of enemies, whether they be soldiers or militia or ice soldiers, or there's so much bad guy variety in this game that you need to think as to which kind of power you need to use, and if sometimes these powers are not going to do the job, then you need to get up close and kick some ass with your amp. There's only two negative remarks that I can think of with the gameplay. One is that the XP that you use to purchase these new powers is gained through completing certain things. And some of these things are some of the side stuff, like helping out citizens or killing out certain monsters that are sabotaging a group of innocent people. And that boosts up not only your karma meter, but also your XP that you can then use to purchase powers. And along with the main story missions, you could also do side missions to boost up your XP. My complaint about that, however, is that much like the first game, even though it doesn't happen for a while, in fact it happens way later than it did in the first game, where it started to happen a little bit earlier than expected. But much like the first game, you hit that point where you start seeing the same side mission over and over. I don't know how many times I was looking around the map and I kept finding the same overcharge mission. And I tried it out one time and it was fun, but I really do not want to do it 3 or 4 more times. And the other thing that I'm a little bit mixed about is the fact that, and I don't remember this being the case in the first game, but this time around, along with having to spend XP to unlock certain powers, you also have to complete these tasks to be able to unlock the ability to spend your XP on there, which is kind of, it just feels a little bit too much of a chore sometimes. Sometimes, because there will be moments where there are certain powers that get unlocked that were genuinely worth it. And plus, I was already about to finish off this task. And some of these tasks are kind of simple, like kills a certain amount of enemies using headshots. Some of these other powers demand these tasks that just make me feel kind of lazy to even get the power, so I just ended up skipping it. But these tasks to be able to upgrade your powers and get some new ones along the way are one of the few things that you can do after you beat the game. And that's the thing, this game provides an awful lot of replay value. You can either do that, or you can do some of the side missions you missed out on before, or you can collect all 300 blast shards to boost up your electrical charge, or you can just do whatever you want. Whatever you see as you're running down the city and running along the electrical lines, which is always a lot of fun, because not only you can check out the entire city in its full glory, but you can also interact with so many things that you could do. There's a decent amount of replay value there after you have beaten the game. So that only leaves me one last component to talk about in Infamous 2 that was not in Infamous 1, and from what I can tell isn't an Infamous Second Son either, because they could kind of tell this wasn't a successful integration. I understand their ambition to want to try something new, but I can definitely see why they didn't bother to do it again, and that is the user-generated content. They tried doing this thing where you get to make your own missions and then post them online through the PlayStation Network, and other people get to play them. It's something that some other games have a tendency to do, mainly the Little Big Planet franchise. Here, I just felt like they just missed their mark, because The only fun thing about it was playing other people's missions, whether those people were other Sucker Punch developers or people like you and me. I'm sorry, I noticed I just messed that up. But people like you and me, making some of these missions and then posting them online. Some of them were really fun to play, whether they be, like I said, from Sucker Punch developers that did certain missions on the side besides making the actual missions for the game, or people out there who just had fun with it. They had an abundance of time, they had a lot of patience, and they managed to put things together to make a brand new mission that was fun to play. And it's just the creativity of some of these people is immense, and even if it's not creativity, it's just downright lunacy. There's this one mission where it says assassinate Justin Bieber. I played it, and like whoever made this, they put together this concert, and they have people in the audience, and then they have a creature up on stage going, and all you have to do is just kill this monster, and the mission is complete, and you get some bonus XP, which you can actually get from any mission that you complete in the user-generated content creator. So that's actually pretty cool, and like I said, it's a fun gag to take on some of these missions that are either really creative or super short and stupid and silly, but they're still fun because anybody created this, and they just had an awful lot of fun messing around with the creator. But then I decided to try it out myself, and man, it's way too complex because they're using terminology like logic and utility, and I don't know, they're just using terminology that I think developers would understand much more, because by the end of it all, I felt like I was actually creating a mission for the game that felt like a job. It felt like a chore rather than a fun pastime. I felt like if I should be doing this, I should be working at Sucker Punch and getting paid for it, because it was just too intricate of how you need to connect all of these different logical points and triggers together, and it was just too much for me. I'd rather just play other people's missions, people that have the time and patience to tackle some of this material and have fun with it. And to top things off, there's no tutorials in-game. You have to go online and go to their YouTube channel and look up the tutorials there to figure out what the hell you're supposed to do. Really? And while I was doing my research to figure out where the tutorials are, I came across an article saying that Infamous Second Son was not going to be supporting the user-generated content. I can see why now. But that does not take away from what I perceive to be an improved sequel and just an overall really fun game in Infamous 2 that did some surprising things with its character and its story, and did some things that you should definitely do with a sequel with its gameplay. And overall, I had a really fun experience, so I give Infamous 2 a high 8 out of 10. Now, like I said at the beginning of the review, before I wrap up, I'm going to briefly talk about the bonus DLC that they released for this game around Halloween time called Festival of Blood. Sounds appropriate, doesn't it? And basically what this DLC is, it's actually a story DLC that has two of our main characters from the game, Cole and Zeke, trying to figure out why all of a sudden during Pyre Night, which is this night that the city comes alive and celebrates Halloween, or at least their version of Halloween, but they're trying to investigate this zombie infestation that comes out during this night and why it is that they're there. The only problem is that Cole managed to get bitten, so he's racing against the clock to try to figure out why this vampire infestation is here and what it's going to take to stop them. And man, just like the original game, this is really fun. First of all, the story is completely disconnected from the previous two Infamous games, meaning it has nothing to do with the story, alright? The only thing that it has to do with those two games is the integration of Cole and Zeke. And that's pretty much it. Oh, and the city of New Marais. Other than that, it's its own little story that is kind of campy and pulpy, but really, really fun. And it knows that it's campy and pulpy, so it never takes itself too seriously. And plus, you get bitten, so ultimately Cole becomes a vampire. So the ability to use Cole and use not only his electrical powers, but also these vampire powers that he's able to receive through getting bitten by a vampire are really cool. You can deteriorate into a group of bats, and you get to fly. You get to fly, okay? How awesome is that? And just when I thought that New Marais could not get any more beautiful, it lights up even more during this Pyre Night, because as you're going down the streets, you have all these people dressed up in costumes, celebrating, lighting things up on fire, and they got these giant monoliths that they light up on fire, things that are something out of a New Orleans festival, especially around Halloween time. And man, it just looks gorgeous. And Sucker Punch definitely stepped it up a notch in their graphics and how to make their games look beautiful. And from what I can tell, they definitely improved upon themselves with Infamous Second Son on the PlayStation 4. But that's for another time. My only slight complaint is that throughout the story, they build this antagonist up to be a force to not reckon with. But by the end of the game, the boss battle with this antagonist ends up being a bit of a disappointment because it's one of those boss battles where you fight the henchmen-ish that they send out rather than the boss themselves. And you just attack the boss ever so often, but for the most part, you're just defeating their lackeys. And I've always found boss battles to be kind of underwhelming whenever they do that, especially when you build up this antagonist to be this evil devil incarnate. But still, this DLC was a tremendous amount of fun. It's only about 2 hours, but I felt like that was the appropriate running time for this kind of DLC. I had an awful lot of fun with it. And to top things off, you do not need any of the Infamous games to play it. So if by some chance you are not convinced to play Infamous or Infamous 2, or you did play Infamous but you don't know how Infamous 2 is going to hold up, then I gotta be honest, I recommend that you go online and you download this DLC. I think it's $10, so it might be a little bit hefty to play a 2-hour campaign and spend $10 on it. But you can play it without owning the original game, and it gives you a taste, pun intended, of what Infamous 2 is all about. Nevertheless, I recommend you get Infamous 2 no matter what, because I definitely think that it's a very much improved sequel over the original. Something that other sequels should aspire to be. So, let me know what you guys thought of Infamous 2 if you have played it, but if you have not and are kind of on the fence as to whether or not you should do, whether or not you have played the first Infamous game, then again, I definitely recommend it, and if you have been convinced by my review, be sure to use the link in the description below to get it. It would really help me out a lot. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys later. Now, of course, the thing that you got to keep in mind is the developer. Oh my god.